Beneath the shifting sands of Saqqara, where time folds into silence and the wind carries only the sighs of the dead, a discovery was made that was never meant to be found. It happened in 1923, one year, after the famed unsealing of Tutankhamun's tomb shook the world. But this was different. There were no trumpeting headlines, no parades of archaeologists standing with smug, dusty grins beside their golden hall, because the tomb in question wasn't documented. Not in any royal scroll, not in any priestly record, not in any stone etching scorched beneath the Egyptian sun. It simply was. And at its center lay a queen no one remembered. She was found lying on a bed of jet-black obsidian, her bones intact, her face encased in the most exquisite burial mask Egypt had ever produced. One not of traditional gold leaf, but of solid, unyielding gold polished to a mirror's gleam. Her name was nowhere to be seen. Not a single hieroglyph etched her title. She was nameless. But one could not deny the agony carved into the contours of her burial chamber. Walls scratched with primitive markings. Almost desperate, as if someone, perhaps the queen herself, had tried to leave behind a final scream. At first, the team thought the tomb was a hoax, a fabrication from a deranged 19th century explorer. But then the carbon dating shattered that hope. It was real. Older than Tutankhamun, perhaps even predating Hatshepsut, a queen erased from history. They called her the Lady of the Golden Mask. But in the months to come, the name would carry with it not reverence, but terror. For it is said the lead archaeologist, Dr. Marek Lewinsky, was found 3 weeks later in his Cairo apartment. Mouth sewn shut with gold thread, eyes wide open, pupils dilated to black pools. In his clenched hand, a single word scrawled in ancient Demotic script: "She watches." But we are not here to speak of curses, not yet. We are here to speak of a woman, queen whose death was so grotesque, drenched in madness that Egypt itself seemed to erase her from memory. And it all begins not in her tomb, but in the final days of her reign. According to the reconstructed fragments of a priest's journal found near the tomb, on a scroll buried an Asha queen by the name of Neferata, ruled during a time of immense drought and unrest. The Nile had receded, crops turned to ash, children withered like dry reeds, and in the absence of water, blood began to flow. Nefertiti, once hailed as a daughter of Isis, grew silent. She no longer walked the temple grounds. She no longer addressed the masses from her obsidian balcony. It was said her skin became pale, her eyes hollow. Her voice, when it came, was distant, as if spoken from behind a veil of death. But more disturbing than her disappearance was what came in her place: the sacrifices. At first it was cattle, then infants. Then the high priest himself was crucified upside down on the obelisk of Hathor, and Nefertiti stood beneath it, cloaked in black linen, her face hidden, her arms red to the elbow. The kingdom was afraid, but none dared speak, for she was still queen, and she spoke in dreams. Some say she had made a pact, an ancient one, with what no one knew, but her beauty had changed, once radiant, now waxen and cold. Her breath, they said, left frost on stone. And the most terrifying detail: she wore the golden mask, not in death, but in life. That is where we leave this first chapter. A queen vanished from history, hidden behind a mask of gold, and a kingdom that dared not ask why. The mask was never removed. Not by the priests who bathed her, not by the concubines who brushed her hair in trembling silence, not by the generals who bowed low enough to kiss her sand-dusted feet. Even her closest handmaidens claimed never to have seen the queen's face after her second year of reign. Only a few remembered it from before: a pale young woman with hair like sunlit bronze, lips as crimson as lotus wine, and eyes, those eyes they whispered of something not quite human. But beauty in Egypt was never rare. Divinity, however, was, and Nefertiti, as her reign progressed, began to take on more than the mantle of queen. She demanded offerings not as ruler, but as deity. It began subtly. In the 3rd season of the drought, she ordered a silver shrine to be built beside the temple of Osiris I, not for any god known to men, but for the one who waits beneath. The scribes, of course, were forbidden from recording the name, but whispers drifted like sand in the wind. A forgotten entity, older than Ra, a being without eyes, that fed not on flesh, but memory. Worshipped only in a time before pyramids, before men even knew to bury their dead. Then, the transformation deepened. Witnesses spoke of a sickly sweetness that filled the air wherever she walked. Like lotus flowers left too long in stagnant water. Pets vanished from the palace grounds. Servants claimed to hear a child weeping softly from behind her chamber doors, though no child lived in the royal residence. And those who displeased her were not whipped nor executed. They were taken. No one saw how; they would simply vanish. Entire households. Daughters, scribes, musicians. Even a high priest of Thoth disappeared between one sunset and the next. The only thing left behind in his chambers. A single hieroglyph, drawn in blood, that no scholar could translate. It was not Egyptian, not Sumerian, not of any language known, but it resembled, hauntingly, a mask. Her vizier Amon-Amat was the only man permitted to speak directly to her. It is said that he once begged her to lift the mask, just for a moment, just to remind the people of her humanity. That day the Nile ran black with silt. Thousands of dead fish floated to the surface. Crops failed overnight. A solar eclipse fell upon the city, though none had been predicted by the stargazers. Amon-Amat was never seen again. But the rot went deeper. A traveling physician, recruited from distant Thebes, was summoned to tend to the queen late one evening. He arrived at her chamber and found it covered in heavy drapes of indigo silk. The scent of embalming resin hung thick in the air, though no body had died. Not yet. 2 silent guards stood at the entrance. He approached, and the mask was watching him. She did not speak. She did not move. But the physician felt his own thoughts slipping from him like ink running off papyrus. He couldn't remember his own name, couldn't remember why he had come, and yet his legs moved. He reached for her pulse. Cold. There was no heartbeat, not a single flutter beneath the skin. And then her hand closed around his wrist. It took 3 men to pull him from the room. He screamed for 3 days. When he finally calmed, he wrote a single sentence before throwing himself into the fire pit. The scroll, partially burned, still exists today, kept hidden in a private vault at the British Museum. What little survived reads, "The mask does not hide her, it holds her in." By the 6th year of her reign, Nefertiti no longer appeared to age. Her limbs remained thin, elegant. Her skin taut and unblemished. But her presence was that of something ancient. When she entered a room, candles snuffed themselves. Cats arched and hissed. Infants cried blood. Statues of other gods cracked down their centers, and the people worshipped, because what else could they do? To question the queen was to vanish. To touch the mask was death, and yet something even darker was beginning to stir. For if the mask did not hide her, but imprisoned her, then who or what still looked out from behind its golden eyes, and who had sealed it shut? We will descend deeper in Part 3 into the final days of her reign. And the one man who dared remove the mask, they called him Satemka, a scholar once, a priest, briefly, but above all, a man consumed by silence. He had served under 3 pharaohs before Nefertiti, yet never sought power, wealth, or recognition. What Satemka desired was far older than the crown, the truth. He was the last surviving initiate of the cult of the Veiled Flame, an ancient order dedicated to preserving the balance between the seen and the unseen. When he heard whispers of the masked queen and her unaging face, of temples erected in the name of forgotten gods, he knew. The seal had broken. So he returned to Memphis in the 7th year of her reign, not as a priest, but as a shadow. Satemka moved through the underlayers of the city libraries beneath libraries, tombs within tombs. He found fragments, scrolls burned and reburied, stelae whose inscriptions had been chiseled clean. Records purged by those who feared knowledge more than death itself. But still, the pieces came together, and then the name, not Neferata, not the Lady of the Golden Mask. Her true name, carved into the spine of a funerary statue locked in a lead casket beneath the temple of Bastet. Nebet. Sekhmet, the bride of the devourer. She had not been born royal. She had been chosen. Or perhaps she had answered something that called, according to the text, Nebet Sekhmet had disappeared at the age of 16. The desert swallowed her. When she returned a year later, her skin was cracked like clay, her hair white as bone, and she spoke in languages no one could recognize. They say her mother wept with joy, but died that very night with sand packed in her lungs. Her father tried to embrace her, but his heart stopped mid-beat. Only the temple priests accepted her hand. They crowned her queen, not for her lineage, for her rival. Setemka was not afraid, not truly, for fear only binds the living. And what stood on the throne of Egypt, sealed inside a mask of polished gold, was something that had begun to forget it had once been alive. So he devised a plan. Not a violent one, there could be no blood, for blood only fed her further. No, Setemka would approach through the old laws. Ritual, binding, language. He reconstructed the rite of Purhakatha, forbidden tongue, using fragments from forbidden papyri smuggled from Abydos. It was an incantation not to destroy, but to remember. For if the mask imprisoned her, perhaps it did so with good reason. But the woman, perhaps, she could still be saved. The night of the eclipse, Setemka entered the palace. The guards, as though lulled by a spell, let him pass. The corridors twisted like intestines, pulsing with an unseen heartbeat. The torches did not burn, but glowed with a blue flame. And at the end of the longest hall, the throne room. There she sat, the queen, still, silent, watching. The mask gleamed in the dark, impossibly bright. No crown adorned it. No symbols of kingship. Only the long, smooth surface, featureless but for the etched ridges where her lips might have been. He stepped forward. "I know your name," he whispered. "Not the one they gave you. The one you buried." No reaction. "I do not seek to banish you. I seek to wake you." And then a voice so old it seemed to creak as it spoke, coated not through the air, but through his bones. "Wake me, and I will show you what lies beneath the Nile." Setemka began the ritual, slowly, deliberately. His voice trembled, not from fear, but from memory. As if something inside him, some ancient instinct, remembered the rite as though it had always been there. The room shook. Columns cracked. A low hum began to rise, like thousands of flies trapped behind walls. The mask turned, and for the first time in 7 years, Nefertiti Nebet's Xmet moved. She stepped down from the obsidian throne like a statue gaining flesh, her golden mask tilted toward him. And she spoke not in Egyptian, not in any tongue known to man, but in a vibration, a thought carved into silence. Setemka finished the last line of the spell, and then he reached out. His fingers touched the base of the mask, warm, humming, alive. And then, with a slow, groaning hiss like the breath of a buried god, it loosened. The mask fell, when what lay beneath it was not a woman, not anymore, not even a corpse, but something in between, like a face made of memory, weeping in reverse, collapsing into itself. Setemka saw every moment of her life at once. A girl by the Nile, a scream beneath the sand, a pact sealed with breath and salt, a crown placed on a trembling skull. He saw her suffering, her hunger, her loss of self, and then he saw it. The thing she had become. The thing that now stared back at him without eyes, without form, only endless gnashing want. And it was free. The throne room was no longer a place. It had become a wound in the world. As the golden mask struck the obsidian floor, it did not shatter. Instead, it trembled softly at first, then violently as if resisting the final act of severance. Flames erupted from the floor's seams, not with heat but with cold, a piercing, bone-deep chill that turned breath into mist and sound into silence. The columns cracked open, revealing hollowed-out corpses sealed within them guards. Priests, lovers, all reduced to husks, their eyes still open, eternally watching. And in the center of it all stood Setemka, face pale as unbaked clay. Mouth frozen open in a scream that refused to leave his throat. He had seen her. He had seen everything. Nebet Sekhmet once Nefertiti's had not made a pact. She was the pact. A vessel, chosen not by gods, but by something that predated worship itself. Something older than stone, more ravenous than time, intelligence that had survived the collapse of stars, drifting across eons in search of form. When she vanished into the desert as a child, it had found her, and it had fed first on her loneliness, then her love, and finally on her name. What remained had returned as queen, but it had not been enough. That was why she wore the mask, not to hide her face, but to keep it from collapsing into what she truly was. It was a prison, forged in gold and magic, crafted not by humans, but by the cult of the veiled flame to contain her essence. And now, with the mask removed, she was no longer bound by time or form. She hovered now, not walked her body, shedding particles of light and ash, her limbs folding in directions no body should move. Her face rippled like fabric in wind, revealing dozens of others beneath, faces of those she had devoured, lived through, forgotten, a child's grin, an old man's sob, a lover's silent scream. Sedam Ka dropped to his knees. He understood now why the mask was never to be touched, why her name had been struck from stone, why entire dynasties chose to bury her existence rather than confront it. She was not evil. No, evil is a human word. She was hunger, she was absence, given breath and form. A god who had forgotten it was once a girl. She remembered him, because Sedam Ka had once been a boy years ago who had watched her vanish into the desert. A friend. The last memory she had tried to hold on to. That's why the mask hadn't killed him. That's why the ritual hadn't destroyed her. For a single flickering instant, her true face returned. It was beautiful, terrible, tragically human. Tears real, tears slid down her translucent cheek. "I remember," she whispered. Then the palace collapsed. Not in fire nor stone, but in forgetting. The walls dissolved into dust mid-air. The stars blinked out one by one. And with a thunderous silence, the queen vanished, folded backward into the rift she had torn open with her unmasking, swallowed by the thing that had once dwelled inside her. Only Sedam Ka remained, alive but broken. They found him days later, half buried in sand, clutching the golden mask in his lap like a child with a dead sibling. He never spoke again. He returned to Thebes and carved a tomb with no name, no entrance, and no heir. The mask was sealed within, and he laid himself beside it, mouth stitched shut with gold thread, just as the first archaeologists would be found centuries later. As for the tomb in Saqqara, it remained hidden. Until 1923, when greed outpaced wisdom, the British team who found it, of course, denied all supernatural claims. The official record calls it Tomb Q Undelta. The mask, now labeled Artifact 17C, rests in the vaults of the British Museum, kept far from public view. No photograph has ever captured its surface correctly. Some say the lens fogs. Others say the mask reflects faces that aren't present in the room. But those who've seen it really seen it, and never forget. And at night, sometimes they dream of a golden face with no mouth, and a voice whispering from behind it. I remember, what did the golden mask conceal? Not just the face of a forgotten queen, but a silence so ancient even the gods dared not speak its name.